What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch back here with another NFL division preview. In this video, I'm going to break down and predict every record inside the NFC West for 2020. And the NFC West, you could argue, might be the best division in the NFL entering this season. And what I mean by the best is from top to bottom, the most competitive division. I feel like every team in this division has an argument to make the playoffs. And I will say there are three teams inside this division that I feel strongly have a good chance of making the playoffs in 2020. There's two teams, the Seahawks and the 49ers, who made it a year ago, and one team who made it all the way to the Super Bowl as the NFC champs. So the NFC West, over these past 10 years, this past decade, I feel, has been loaded. Been to the Super Bowl, 4 times? So this division is absolutely, I think, the peak of the NFC. The top dog when you talk about competition inside this conference. Before I give you my thoughts on every NFL NFC West team for 2020, spike the like button and subscribe to the Bottom Line View for more NFL previews and breakdowns just like this. Also, comment your opinion below. Let me know what your standings and predictions are for the NFC West in 2020. Now, the NFC West, again, a division that I feel from top to bottom is loaded. So it's always difficult when you look at divisions like these to choose who's the best, who's the worst, and who's in the middle. Who's in no man's land. So let's start off with the team that I feel is going to be the worst in 2020. And that team, to me, is the LA Rams. The LA Rams are, in my opinion, the fourth team in this division, the bottom team in this division, actually regressing in 2019 despite actually having a winning record in 2019. They went to the Super Bowl in 2018 and have been a winning team every season under Sean McVay, if I am not mistaken. In 2020, I expect McVay, while I love Sean McVay as a coach and as a personality, I do believe this will be his first losing season. I look at this Rams roster and I see many more holes than I've seen in the past. I look at this Rams roster and it does not compare to the 2018 Super Bowl roster. It does not compare to the 2017 roster. And it certainly, even compared to 2019, doesn't compare. Really, they lost quite a few pieces just going down the list of Brandon Cooks at wide receiver, their deep threat, their downfield option who stretches defenses thin. They lost their star running back, Todd Gurley, and even if he wasn't a star any longer, he still is a quality running back, and he's been relied upon in this offense and scheme more than any player on this team. Defensively, they lost a double-digit sack guy in Dante Fowler, a leader at the linebacker position in Clay Matthews, a leader at the safety position in Eric Weddle. They lost their nickel corner in Nickel Roby-Coleman, and I could probably keep going. Corey Littleton as well at linebacker, who's one of the 10 best linebackers in the league. So the Rams have lost not just depth, which is shaky this year, especially defensively, but big-name players that have contributed, that the Rams have paid, and maybe it worked out, maybe it didn't. And they weren't able to replace those players with quality replacements, with quality talent, in my opinion, at least not this year. Maybe moving forward they can do that, and I don't think it will take long for Sean McVay to turn this ship back in the right direction. But as for 2020, this team is looking like they're going to take a dip and looking like they're going to have a down season. Let's start with the offense. My rankings, their offense is 18th. I still think they'll have a top 20 offense this year, but something that you always have to consider with the Rams is they're a team that always puts up yards. And a lot of these yards come at the end of games. They're the most pass-happy offense when losing in the NFL. Therefore, Jared Goff is going to have a lot of big yardage totals, but a lot of the times they're going to be empty yardage totals. That boosts their numbers at the end of the day in the box score, but there's a difference between having a good statistical offense and an actually legitimately good offense that hits you in the mouth in the first drive to the end of the game. A lot of the times, the Rams, they rather have a great game, they have a struggle fest, let's say, or they're kind of caught in the middle. They're very inconsistent. I noticed that last year that they had games where they went off. They had other games where they started super late. They just weren't clicking early on, but they got it later on, and you have to wonder how much that was of the defense playing a little bit softer, how much it had to do with their offensive line, which I think is a huge reason they are no longer a top 10 elite top 5 offense like they were when they went to that Super Bowl and in 2017 as well. In 2019, statistically they looked good, but they took major steps backwards in their running game, on the offensive line, and even their passing game, to be honest with you. So let's look at that offense. So the offense, Robert Woods is one of my favorite players on this team. He's super consistent, super tough. He's going to line up outside. He's going to line up inside in the slot. Now, something to consider about this offense, I do have their base personnel from the last few seasons with the 3 receivers, the 1 back, the 1 tight end. That's been typical of the Rams. They've pretty much set the trend. Sean McVay has set the trend of this offense in the NFL for the amount and the percentage that is used across the league. But I do expect Everett to sneak on the field. They're going to run a little bit more 12 personnel as they did last year at times, more so than they have in the past. And why would they? Because they're no longer one of the top teams in terms of 3 receivers across the board. Now, I am a fan of rookie Van Jefferson. Apparently, he is having a good camp, but he is unproven, and especially given he has never played an NFL action, even preseason, it's going to be difficult to trust him, especially early in the season. So I expect more 12 personnel early in the season until Van Jefferson can really get his feet underneath him, understand the NFL, understand what it's all about. Then maybe we see him sneaking on the field more often than not. But him being on the outside is going to allow Cooper Kupp to sneak in the slot where he's very efficient and effective, one of the better slot receivers in the game. Not super explosive or not one of the best athletes at the position, but very smart, a crisp route runner, and understands how to work inside Sean McVay's offense. This offensive line clearly is a weakness across the board. Whitworth was not the 17th best left tackle last year, but I will give him the respect where respect is due, as he's been a top 10 tackle for most of his career. I expect him to have a bit of a rebound this year. Same as on the opposite side with Havenstein, or whatever you say his name, Havenstein, I believe. Rob, let's call him. I just feel like last year he had a real down year. And I don't know really what it was, if it was due to injury, if it was due to scheme, if it was due to just everyone around him falling apart. But it seemed like in 2018 he was awesome. In 2017 he improved. And over the most of his career he's been solid. I think last year was probably his worst year of his career. Their real weakness, though, I think they'll be fine at tackle. They're definitely not one of the worst units at tackle in the league. It's the interior line that really, really is not good. I mean, both their guards rank in the bottom 5 in the NFL at left and right guard and guard in general. Their center ranks in the bottom 5 starters in the NFL. So that trio has been taken advantage of and has caused Jared Goff many turnovers, interceptions, quicker throws, and decisions than he's wanted. And that has been the biggest weakness for this offense. The fact that they have not been able to handle their assignments at all. That's why they've been just inconsistent. And Tyler Higbee, you'll see, is in the top 10 for tight ends for me because I love Tyler Higbee. You look at Jared Goff, I don't think he is a top 20 quarterback. I think he is a system product. Cam Akers has never played, so I can't really say he's any better than where I ranked him, but he does have promise in the pass and the run game, so I'm looking forward to seeing him play. Higbee, I think, is going to have a breakout, huge season this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. Now, I will say Van Jefferson sneaking on the field might take away from that. The hope is if you're a Higbee fantasy owner, they play more 12 than they play, 3 receivers, but 11 personnel is what it's called. I feel like, really, this offense is still going to be good, but I think it's going to be inconsistent. And the reason it's going to be inconsistent is because the more tape, the more defensive coordinators understand what Sean McVay likes. I think the NFL is starting to catch up in that regard every season, every game that passes. And the next thing is the offensive line. It's far too inconsistent. It's one of the weakest in the league. And when you have an inconsistent, bad offensive line, you're going to be inconsistent as an offense. It's as simple as that. And the final thing, they don't have a deep threat. Van Jefferson's a fine rookie receiver, but they do not have that speed. Robert Woods is not that guy. Cooper Kupp is not that guy. And the Rook is not that guy. So they're going to lack that stretch the field element to their offense. But that's not to say that they will not have their games where they dominate. Now, defensively is where I'm really concerned. I still think this offense can have a top 15 year. But this defense is really concerning. They have 2 elite players in Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey who are top 3 at their position. Aaron Donald is clearly the best defensive lineman in the NFL and the best defensive player, in my opinion, right over Stephon Gilmore. Now, their defensive line is still okay at best. I think Michael Brockers, they no longer have that Ndamukong Suh in there who left 2 seasons ago to Tampa Bay, or last offseason, I should say. So since they've missed him, they've missed that depth and that dominant trio inside that I think opened up their edge players and opened up this defense for dominant defensive line performances. And it took pressure off Aaron Donald, I think. I think that's a big reason Donald's sack numbers dipped, is because Suh wasn't there to take attention away from him. But their edge position and their linebacker position is probably, in combination, the worst in the league. When you look at the 2 worst starters probably across the NFL, and Young and Kaiser. And then on the edge, Floyd and Ebukam, I think Ebukam's okay. I think he has promise. He hasn't really shown that he can be a big-time starter, but I think he's a good role player at the very least. Maybe Leonard Floyd turns into their new Dante Fowler, and he has a breakout year this year for them, and maybe it is a good budget signing on their part. I totally understand the signing to replace Dante Fowler because they're similar body, similar makeup, similar draft profile, so I get it. But I don't think he is the player that Dante Fowler was for them. Now, cornerback and secondary-wise, they're not bad. I think they'll be actually pretty good, maybe underrated. I think Troy Hill is underrated. I think Jalen Ramsey is awesome. He'll have maybe his best season since 2017. And then their safety combo is all right. I think it's a little slow, but it's all right. So defensively, I think they're going to have to rely on Donald, Brockers, and their corners and secondary to get it done if they cannot get pressure off the edge. Maybe having Donald, Brockers, and Robinson in there will be huge for them when it comes to opening up their edge for getting sacks and pressure. They also may be looking at more 3 safety sets as well. They drafted a kid, I think Burgess, in the 3rd round, so maybe he plays a little nickel as well. That's also a question. I'm not sure if Williams will be their nickel or not. That's just my projection based on what I've seen from their depth chart and the offseason. So the Rams, I think they're the worst team in this division. Not to say they're terrible. Not to say they have no chance of doing anything this year, because they certainly still have potential. Anything's possible with Sean McVay, but I just don't see it this year. I see big-time regression for them. My record is 6-10. I think the Rams will go 6-10. This is going to be a big decline, a 3-game decline from a year ago. I think the addition of the Cardinals being a legitimate playoff threat hurts the Rams' odds drastically. The Rams also play a very difficult schedule this year, and I don't see the talent there like it used to be. So the Rams, 6-10, ceiling 9-7, and floor 5-11. I think if I was a bigger believer in Jared Goff, if Jared Goff was an elite quarterback who could carry a team the way that he is paid, I'd probably say, okay, this team's more of 8-8, 9-7 territory. But because I do not believe that about Jared Goff, that's why I have them at 6-10. I think that's a big difference between them and the team I'm going to talk about next, the Arizona Cardinals. I think the reason I'm high on the Cardinals and not high on the Rams is because the Cardinals have Kyler Murray, who I think is a legitimate baller at quarterback and a future star in this league. On the other hand, I think Goff is a system QB, and there's nothing wrong with that. He can get it done. He's obviously been to a Super Bowl. but he's not a difference maker. He's not a guy that can create and carry a team on his back the way that I feel Kyler is and did last year. Now, the Cardinals I have finishing third in the NFC West. I have their offense finishing top 10 at number 7 with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins. A little improvement on the offensive line. Not as big as I would have liked, but an improvement. And just the trickle-down effect of having a number 1 receiver, opening up Christian Kirk to be a number 2, Larry Fitz to be the slot number 3, and maybe possibly Andy Isabella contributing as well, and Kenyon Drake being there for a full season as well. Chase Edmonds is a sneaky guy at running back. I also think that Cliff Kingsbury, having his full assets at receiver, having a legitimate number 1, is going to open up what he can do schematically in the passing game and is going to help him get other guys open, because Hopkins can get open by himself or at least win his matchup by himself. The other guys now, he can scheme open. And that's an important part. To have that number 1 option, that guy that takes all the attention from everyone else, is a big deal to an offensive mind. And I think that's going to be the case. You also look, and why I believe in Cliff is because he adjusted very quickly early in his career. He's only coached for 1 year in the NFL. He's had limited experience even at the college level. But we saw last year that once his spread offense and the air raid wasn't working the way he liked because he didn't have the personnel and injuries were starting to hurt his team, he switched his offense, right? He went to more 12 personnel. He tried 11 personnel. You know, he was willing to change and willing to actually approach the game not in a pass-heavy way, but a run-heavy way once he traded for Kenyon Drake. So I actually think Cliff is really underrated. And that combo between Kyler and Cliff is the reason I'm confident this team can take a major leap this year. And the reason I'm confident that they can be relevant. Now let's look at this offense. What Cliff's working with. Kyler, I rank as high right now as number 12. I think he'll enter the top 10 this year. Maybe a couple guys will slide out. I expect probably like a guy like Drew Brees to slide out of that top 10 and Kyler to take his place. But he certainly has the talent to do so. Kenyon Drake is a borderline top 12 option. I would say he's anywhere within the top 15. Christian Kirk is a solid receiver. He might be slightly overrated. I think he was basically funneled targets last year because he was one of their only options, but he can get it done as a number 2. I like that he's now a number 2 and not a number 1. Larry Fitzgerald can still get it done in the slot, but he has no explosive ability. So anyone ranking him still as one of the better receivers or even top 50 receivers, I think are out of it. You know, they're losing their minds. They haven't been paying attention. I think Larry Fitzgerald's still a good route runner. He still uses his body control, has great hands, and is just very intelligent and crafty. But his lack of speed, his lack of explosive ability, I mean, is just not there. So him being the slot guy, that's the thing I do question. Where is the speed at this receiver position? That's why I feel Isabella might get more snaps than we expect, because Hopkins, Fitz, and Kirk all are not very fast. Kirk probably being the fastest of any of them here, but not super fast, and you'd like to see more speed in this air raid approach. Now, Humphreys, they re-signed long-term. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt there. He's fine at left tackle, not great. Justin Pugh, I'm a big fan of. He has great versatility, great pass blocker. Cole Sweezy is underrated as a run blocker. I think Beachum is going to be their right tackle starter. It could be Jones, but I think it's going to be Beachum because of experience early on. And apparently they're a big fan of Dan Arnold, but I've barely seen him play in New Orleans. So we'll see if he can do anything in Arizona. Maybe he's a sleeper candidate. But overall, I think the talent of the Cardinals offense is overrated, but I think the scheme is underrated. Therefore, a top 10 offense, a team with a fantastic quarterback, running back, and number 1 receiver. Now, to their defense. The reason I'm not super high on this team, the reason I'm not picking them to do damage this year, but I do think they'll improve, is because of their defense. I just don't see this defense being that good. And it's mostly to do with their secondary. I think they have a major question mark in Thompson at free safety, whichever Thompson they decide to play. Kirkpatrick was signed off the street this offseason as more of a depth sign, and they lost Alford again to injury, and they signed him to replace him. Byron Murphy was one of the worst cornerbacks in the NFL. in terms of passer rating, completion percentage allowed, and Patrick Peterson took a major downgrade in 2019. So can he get back to elite status? That would be a big difference maker if he could still be an elite corner. Isaiah Simmons is going to be a huge help in terms of where their weakness was covering tight ends. Jordan Hicks was a good addition, but really didn't help them enough in terms of the coverage ability. I think Simmons will do that for them. They also added Devondre Campbell for base personnel. I think that was a nice addition as well. Devon Kennard was a decent addition to help out Chandler Jones on the opposite edge, but he's not great. Jordan Phillips, I think they might have, overpaid, but I think he can contribute as a pass rusher. But this defense, it just screams mediocrity. I don't love the scheme. I think they still need to figure out, and I want to see it on the field to see how they utilize Isaiah Simmons. I want to see improvement at the cornerback position, but I just don't see it on paper. So the Cardinals are a defense that I think is going to be one of the worst in the league, probably bottom 5, bottom 10 at the very least. I don't see the pressure outside of Chandler Jones consistently. I don't see the coverage consistently. And their run defense isn't great either. They lack big bodies. So I think the Cardinals defense is the reason that keeps them out from being a legitimate NFC contender in 2020. But they could be in 2021 given they add a couple more pieces. My record prediction for the Cardinals is 8-8. Now, I was going to go with 9-7, but when I added up all my totals for the NFC, I realized that it didn't make a heck of a lot of sense to put the Cardinals at 9-7. And just using my logic alone, feeling how I feel about this team, still feeling this offensive line could be better and it might hurt this offense a little bit to reach its maximum potential. And the fact that, like I've said, the defense isn't the greatest, I have them at 8-8. That's a big improvement from what they did a year ago. Now, could they go to the playoffs? Definitely. If Kyler plays at an MVP level and this offense just strikes gold with DeAndre Hopkins, then they certainly could. But I think it's going to take time to mesh early on with this DeAndre Hopkins-Kyler combination, and I do think they still lack a lot on defense. So 8-8, an average team this year, a team that's extremely exciting, a team that's a pain in the butt for a lot of opponents, and a difficult matchup, I would say, but I don't see them being a legitimate NFC playoff team or contender. I think you're maybe overrating some of their talent if you do believe that. That's just my opinion. All right, so the Cardinals I have finishing third. Now to the team that I have finishing first. We're going to switch it up a little bit here. Now, I have them finishing first, and I didn't before, but I'm going to explain myself because I want to explain myself before I get to the team that I have finishing second for the reasons why I no longer have them finishing first, okay? So the team I have finishing second, or first, I should say, is the Seattle Seahawks. I actually had the 49ers finishing first in this division the entirety of the offseason. Now, some things happened this offseason, just going through them. Jamal Adams was traded to Seattle. Got me thinking a little bit. Quentin Dunbar was not supposed to play, and then he was. Now he's suiting up. The offense, thinking about what they could be. Liking the additions of Greg Olsen, Philip Dorsett, getting Josh Gordon back. Another year of DK. The offensive line being not the worst it's ever been, but not the best. Just thinking about Russell Wilson. And, I did predict him to be the MVP. And I do think he'll win the MVP. So how can I have a guy win the MVP if he doesn't finish first in his division? Think about that. So to any of you that have Russell Wilson winning the MVP, you got to have the Hawks winning the division. I think that's the only way to go about it. Now, I think the biggest thing that changed to me had to do with Jamal Adams, Dunbar, and the improvement they've made in the secondary. This is going to be the best secondary Seattle's had since the Legion of Boom. And that's going to make a major difference for this team and defense. Because last year, they were smoke and mirrors defensively. They were bad. I don't think their ranks indicate how bad they were. They were lit up basically versus any good passing attack last year. And maybe they're not great this year. I still have them at 21. But I still see it as a significant improvement, and they could be higher than that. But offensively, I think this is the best supporting cast Russell Wilson has arguably ever had offensively. Outside of offensive line, like skill position-wise, this might be the best he's ever had. So the Seattle Seahawks are going to be more electric and big play-oriented offensively, and their defense should be better. San Francisco played just about as good as they could play last year. They were, 13-3, 12-4 last year. They went to the Super Bowl. They dominated in the playoffs. And yet they lost to Seattle once, and they nearly lost to them twice, versus a Seattle team I didn't feel was that fantastic. And Seattle won. Yes, Seattle's very weird, okay? They're not a team, like last year, whatever their record was, they were not that good, okay? Because Russell Wilson bails them out consistently, week after week, game after game, fourth quarter after fourth quarter. But at this point, that is just what you have to expect out of the Seahawks. And I expect this year they're going to have more dominating wins because I think their offense is going to be better and their defense is going to be better. They have better talent all around. And I think that is going to show, and they're going to win in more dominating fashion this year than having to win in comeback fashion every week. I think them having Russell Wilson over Jimmy Garoppolo is a big deal. No matter what I think about Kyle Shanahan, who I love, which we'll get to, I think Seattle has more room for error on the field, more room for injury because they have that MVP caliber player on their roster. Now, their offense, just looking across the board at their offensive line, it's not fantastic, but it's not dreadful. They're decent run blocking wise. Dwayne Brown is still pretty good, being a top 20 tackle in the NFL. Russell Wilson's a top 2 quarterback. Chris Carson's a top 15 running back. And in terms of pure running the football, he's probably top 10. DK Metcalf has an opportunity to enter the top 20 wide receiver conversation, and I believe Tyler Lockett is already there. That combination might be the best in the NFL this year. I would not be shocked. And I think DK is going to dominate. People are sleeping on how dominant he can be. Greg Olsen was a nice addition. They get Disley back as well. Philip Dorsett as wide receiver 3 to stretch the field as a burner is not bad. And they also have Josh Gordon, who could also split reps with Philip Dorsett, in my opinion. I think what they have here is interesting at receiver. I've never really heard anyone say this, but I think it's interesting, right? So they have Dorsett, who's kind of like a light version of Tyler Lockett. And they have Josh Gordon, who at this point in his career is a light version of DK Metcalf. So if those guys are to go down, at least those players can replicate what they do. Not at the same level, but replicate it. So I do feel like they're more okay with losing players to injury, at least at receiver. Tight end, they're super deep, and they were really good at tight end last year. Even, what's his name? Hollister was okay, for them. At least, and he's like their third or fourth tight end they have on their roster. And I believe is their third this year. The only thing I'm really concerned about is the offensive line, but we've seen Russell Wilson overcome it season after season, so it's not a huge problem. But I wish it was better. I wish it was better. So the offense, I think, is going to be top 12, arguably top 10. I think Wilson's going to have one of his best statistical passing seasons. I think he's going to be putting up big-time numbers and points with these duo of receivers he has. So, yeah, Seahawks are dangerous. They're a difficult matchup offensively, even if they don't have a fantastic scheme under Schottenheimer. And even if they limit Russell Wilson, Mr. Unlimited, I do feel like those two receivers are going to pose secondary such big issues because of their speed and because of their big play capability. And then you can hit Greg Olsen and Disley and Carson underneath. So they're going to be fun to watch, I think, offensively. Then defensively, they're improved. I think they have arguably the best linebacking position in the NFL with Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, and their first-round pick this year. They did not bring back Kendricks, I don't believe, which he played okay for them the last couple of seasons. But the main thing here is Wagner and Wright taking a lot of the snaps. And probably, I believe the rookie's name is Brooks. He's a really good athlete, great in coverage. So he's going to help in that aspect. That's something where they struggled last year. The linebackers really took a step back, these two veterans, Wagner and Wright, who've been a part of the Legion of Boom before. They struggled, I think, because they were asked to just simply do too much, especially at their age and lacking the physicality, speed, and quickness that they used to have with wear and tear. They were stretched thin, and I think adding a guy like Adams is going to be massive for what that allows and frees up Bobby Wagner to do and KJ Wright to do. Now, their secondary, like I said, is improved. Now, Quinton Dunbar, I have as the number 1 nickel, or you could look at it as the best number 3 corner, although he's the number 2 corner on this team, the second best corner on this team, in my opinion. Underneath Griffin, who's a really underrated outside perimeter corner. I could see Dunbar playing in the nickel. I could see Blair playing in the nickel as a safety / cornerback. I could see Dunbar playing outside. That would take Flowers off of the field. I think maybe early on we might see Dunbar in the nickel, Flowers on the outside. I think it depends on the team they're playing. I think you're going to see snaps where they take Flowers off the field, they have Dunbar on the outside. I think you're going to see some snaps where Dunbar's at nickel or Griffin's at nickel. I definitely could see that because I feel like it depends on the personnel they have to match up with. And Diggs was a great trade for them last year. Their defensive line is very concerning. I'm very concerned with how they're going to get and create pressure, considering that this is a defense that just simply does not blitz. They don't scheme up pressure very much. They're very simple defensively. They play their cover 3, press bail. They've mixed in a little bit more man, cover 1 as of late, last couple of years. But they love to just rely on those big guys up front to get after it. When they had Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill, it wasn't an issue. But now that they don't have anyone, they brought back Bruce Irvin. They have Benson Mayowa, who had a sneaky season for the Raiders last year. Those are the guys that I think will create the most pressure. And Jerron Reed is still solid, but I don't see it the way that it used to be. So that secondary is going to have to be unreal. And luckily, I do think that linebacker position is also good in coverage and flexible and versatile. So that's going to help as well. So I think the secondary will help the rush, but I am concerned that the rush is going to keep the secondary and hang it out to dry. That's why I have them at 21. If I knew they had one legitimate pass rusher, like even if they brought back Jadeveon Clowney, I'd probably put them inside the top 15. But they do not have that, so that's why I'm concerned. But ultimately, I have the Seahawks first. Because, 1, they play a second-place schedule this year, not a first-place schedule. Big deal. Super Bowl hangover for San Francisco is a thing. The team that I feel probably will be best prepared out of this division going into the season, in the wacky offseason that it's been, the chemistry between Wilson and Carroll and what they've done in their experience, I think, is huge. And I think Wilson being the best player in this division will ultimately make the difference because I think they have more margin for error, which is my biggest point when it comes to this team. And their improvement in the secondary, I think, will be enough. I think there's going to be enough regression from the 49ers that causes Seattle to regain their first-place finish in the NFC West, which has been a few seasons now since they've done that. My record for Seattle is 12-4. I have their ceiling being 13-3 and the first seed in the NFC. I have their floor being probably like the 7th seed in the NFC at 9-7, but this is a team that's very safe. You know what to expect. With Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll, this is basically a playoff team every single season. Now, what made me change my mind on the Seahawks and the 49ers? Why am I now all of a sudden lower on the Niners when I was a guy that was all the way on the Niners last year? I was that guy that made that video saying they could be a Super Bowl team, that they could be a contender in 2019. What changed, Mitch? Why did you jump off the 49er bandwagon? Well, I have not. The 49ers could definitely win this division, and I would not be surprised. They are the most talented team in this division, as you see by their division ranks. They have the best offense and the best defense. But sometimes, the best talent does not win the division. They do not win the Super Bowl. And as we saw, I just keep replaying that Super Bowl in my head. Patrick Mahomes, a team, a quarterback that was outmatched, somehow beating them. And to me, that same team is Seattle. I feel Seattle and the Chiefs, if there's any replicable or similar team in the NFC to the Chiefs, it's Seattle. So when it comes to head-to-head matchups, while I think the 49ers will dominate the line of scrimmage, the fact is the 49ers should have never been that close versus Seattle. Seattle should have never put up the fight they did in those two games versus the Niners. Because the Niners were strictly way more talented, and Seattle has closed the gap in talent. Not to mention the 49ers have lost a big-time defensive piece in DeForest Buckner, and they're due for defensive regression. Their defense with New England was unfriggin' believable, like all-time special. So it's going to see regression. And then you add the fact that you have that target on the back that you got to deal with. You know, and my question, I have two teams that I think the 49ers could be this year. I think they'll be a playoff team. They're not going to miss the playoffs. They're too talented. They're too well coached with Kyle Shanahan, who is my favorite coach in the league outside of Bill Belichick. He's my favorite. And my favorite offensive coach to watch. I love Kyle Shanahan. And that's the reason that it really pains me to not pick them to finish first in this division. But again, I could see it happening. I just don't. But there's two teams that I would compare them to. They're going to be one of these two teams. One, they're going to be the 2017 Atlanta Falcons. A team that is extremely talented, but for whatever reason does not have the same spark that they did. They go to maybe the divisional round and they lose a defensive contest. They could be the second team, which would mean they win the division and they do good things. They could be the 2013 Seattle Seahawks. Remember, the 2013 Seattle Seahawks won the Super Bowl over the Denver Broncos. Why I say this, one of these two teams, is they remind me a lot of these teams. One, they have a similar defensive scheme. And I feel like with these defensive schemes, once teams get a handle of this defense and what they're going to see week to week, we saw the Niners have a specific weakness. That was speed at receiver and mobile quarterbacks. They struggled versus Arizona. They struggled versus Russell Wilson. They struggled versus Patrick Mahomes. They had certain matchups that they didn't fare well in. And I do think that a lot of the times, just like with my Patriots and what I said about my Patriots defense, they lost a lot of more pieces than the 49ers, so it's not the same. But it is the same in regards to both teams benefited off of playing pretty bad offenses. And that schedule is going to be a little bit tougher in that regard, which is going to put more pressure on your offense and on your quarterback to make plays. An offense that has a lot of injuries and an offense that has some question marks, and we'll get into those. But those are the two teams that I could see. I could see a dominating year two being a contender like the 2013 Seahawks where they're just a force, or I could see them being inconsistent, having ups, having downs. I could see them making the playoffs, maybe winning a playoff game, but losing, similarly to the 2017 Atlanta Falcons. I could see either one of those. Those are the two teams I'm going to throw out for you. Now, let's just look at that schedule that they face this year in regards to what I'm talking about. So the San Francisco 49ers, I think, are still going to be a double-digit win team, but this year is going to be tougher. Like I said, they have that target on their back. Everybody knows they're good. Everybody knows what they're about. Everybody knows how to scheme for them. Now, I will say, and this is the reason I'm a fan of drafting Jimmy Garoppolo in fantasy late, is because they have an easy opening schedule. And that is going to help them get to the playoffs. That's why this is a team that may not have a Super Bowl hangover, because that early season schedule is easy. They play Arizona at home. That's going to be difficult because they've struggled with Kyler Murray early on. They play the Jets on the road. They should win that game. They play the Giants on the road. They should win that game. The Eagles are going to be tough because the Eagles have a very good defensive line, are very stout versus the run, and are going to put pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo. So that game is a toss-up. The Dolphins are a win. The Rams, at least one of those games you could count as a win. They play New England in New England. They play Seattle in Seattle. They play Green Bay again, which they should win that game because they match up well. They play the Saints on the road, which I don't know if they'll be able to repeat their performance from a year ago. Buffalo, I have as an AFC contender. Dallas in Dallas. Arizona again, and Seattle again. So this team, I think, will have 6 to 4 losses. But just the fact that they're dealing with these injuries already entering the season, and the fact that I think we're going to see defensive regression, there's just no way around it. That's why I have this team finishing second instead of first. Now let's look at their talent and go through their roster. I think, again, this is the most talented offense across the board in the division. I do question if Jimmy Garoppolo truly can be a franchise quarterback. Just like Jared Goff, I think he's closer to system product than actual great player that elevates talent, but he can get the job done just like Jared Goff. Deebo Samuel, having him back will be great. The question is, can he stay healthy, and when is he back? Brandon Ayuk, I think, is going to be special, but is it this year or next year? Kendrick Bourne is solid, but nothing special. Their running game is going to be really good. We know this with Kyle Shanahan. And their offensive line, I do believe, is improved. George Kittle is fantastic and might have his best season ever. Looking across the board, the only position that really they struggle at is wide receiver. They have great depth at running back. They have Kyle Juszczyk at fullback, who's not on this screen. They brought in Trent Williams at left tackle to replace Staley. They might have to deal with a little bit of chemistry on the offensive line with a couple new faces starting, but I do think it's not going to be an issue. I think their offense will be fine. I just question the passing game somewhat. And if Kyle isn't scheming up some stuff, how are those receivers going to perform? Now, defensively, I look at this defense, and yes, fantastically rated across the board. I mean, you have 3 top 20 defensive linemen, a first-round pick outside of that, another first-round pick coming off the bench in Solomon Thomas, a really talented secondary. But you're going to see regression in all of those guys. Quan Williams is not going to play better than he did. Sherman is only getting older. Tart and Ward were great last year. I don't see them playing better. Fred Warner was fantastic. So basically what I'm saying here is regression is going to happen. Just like I talked about with the Ravens, it's just historically proven that a team that plays at that level just cannot produce the way they did a year ago. And it's going to put more pressure on areas of their team that didn't have to face it before. And I think the 49ers last year went a lot of games without people realizing how legit they were. And this year, that's going to be different. People are going to know from day one this is a contender. And again, I've been a little negative for the 49ers. I love the 49ers. But I do feel that I needed to lay that out for you guys because I don't think this is a team that you just pencil in for the NFC Championship. They definitely have some questions that I think a lot of people are not addressing. So, their record. I have 11-5. That's 1 game below Seattle. They could win the division at 12-4 instead of Seattle, and Seattle sliding to 11-5. I could certainly see that. And that's what I had them at before. Their ceiling is 13-3, being about the same team as last year, dominating defensively and maybe improving offensively. Their floor is 8-8. That would mean their defense sees some injuries, maybe regression from some of their older pieces, and their offense, Jimmy Garoppolo, struggles. People figure him out, and they just are an average team. They have a Super Bowl hangover. It just doesn't click the same way that it did in 2019. That is the floor. But even the floor is still like a 500 team. So that's the NFC West, guys. I have the Seahawks as the number 1 team. I have the 49ers as the number 2. The Cardinals as the number 3. And the Rams as the number 4. I don't think I mentioned this. I have the Cardinals as the number 8 seed in the NFC. Just missing the playoffs. So, those are my NFC West predictions. If you haven't already, check out the rest of my division breakdowns. And later today, when you're watching this, hopefully on Monday, September, I believe the 7th, there'll be an NFC South breakdown live on the channel. So until then, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, spike the like button and subscribe to The Bottom Line View for more NFL vids just like this. It's Mitch. Peace.